get going. So, if you're anything like me, you're wasting a lot of time on LinkedIn these days. And you've probably seen a lot of proclamations or questions about the end of search. Is SEO dead? Uh, feel like I was seeing this every other day for a long while through the turn of the year. And I'm here to help answer this question. So, no, SEO is not dead, right? The title of this webinar is Long Live SEO. Things are certainly changing. That's kind of the TLDR. But when we look back at history, it kind of helps us steady, the ship and realize that, yeah, there might be some changes happening now, but we've claimed SEO to be dead several times in the past. So I'm going to take you on a history lesson here. In 2006, there was a rise of the same proclamation because keyword stuffing became a best practice with SEOs like you and me, uh, and it kind of made content like unconsumable. So SEO was proclaimed dead then. 6 years later, in 2012 or around this time, SEO was again proclaimed dead because Google had changed its ranking criteria to prioritize quality, and people didn't really know what that means. In 2015, mobile search, right, the mobile first algorithm change happened, and some people got hurt by that, and they were unprepared, and so again, people were like proclaiming the same thing: SEO dead. 2019, not that long ago, the same question was asked, and this was when SEO changed its algorithm to focus on search intent as a way to prioritize content. And so, in the last couple years, people have surfaced this age-old question, right? And I hope it helps you see, hey, we've seen this pattern before. People will claim SEO to be dead or ask that question whenever there's a big change happening in search. So, of course, this change is happening with the rise of AI overviews, with the rise of AI content creation, and it's really I don't think the question's totally valid, but like it's worthwhile we take stock of what's changing and adjust what we do in order to continue to win some kind of organic search or answer engine traffic and growth. So we can look at history through the lens of, these proclamations, and we can also look at it through the lens of data. And this data here comes from it's SparkToro through this company called Datos that looked at search click-through rates over the last 10 years, meaning people that search something on their desktop, they actually click on a link and end up on a site. And we can see the pattern here has been a slow but steady decline of click-throughs. So if we extrapolate this into the future with answer engines, we can expect a further decline. And maybe there is a step function that might happen here. I mean, this is a pretty big slope into 2023 and 2024. Maybe in 2025 and 2026, it goes a full percentage or more down. But this is a trend we've seen for a long time, and it helps me at least feel a little sane about it declining in the future, but not like dropping to zero, right? Not dropping. I mean, I would bet it's not going to drop below 40%, maybe not even 50. And so that makes the longevity of this, right, makes me feel like, okay, for the next decade, it's still going to be a great channel. However, it might not be as good as it once was in 2016. Fair? Cool. So let's talk about AI's impact on search. At a very high level, not much has changed. Basically, you have these engines and algorithms that are scraping data and trying to surface relevant data to individuals that are prompting or searching for something. So the game is kind of the same in that as a optimizer, right, as like a brand, you're creating content to try and then meet that person, through the lens of the algorithm or model in order to get the piece seen. So in a sense, the game is still at play. However, tactically, a lot of things are changing. The format of the answers is different. the way they show up. It's not a list of blue links. You're getting a lot of overviews. The percentage of clicks, as we just looked at, is starting, well, has continued to decline and will maybe decline at a bit of a faster rate over the next couple of years and maybe plateau for a while after that. There's less predictability because, of course, there's a lot of change and volatility. And it's possible, especially in like emerging tech type queries, if you search for like AI CRMs, like Austin and the Clarified team might have a lot more competition today than they did a year ago. I mean, one, it's an emerging space, but also because I think more AI native companies are using AI content, like content really powered by AI to produce a high volume and make searches a bit more competitive than they were in years past, right? The ability to produce content's easier, so therefore the searches are going to get more competitive. So it's time, this is why you're here, to start thinking about your AEO strategy and start making some small steps today so you can be optimized for the future as things continue to shift. So now I'm going to take you through some best practices, some things you can actually start doing for answer engine optimization. AEO, some people are calling it GEO, AI search. I don't really care. We're calling it AEO. We'll see how it plays out. But anyways, if there's one thing you take away from my portion of the webinar today, I'd hope it would be this framework. We're calling it the AI visibility pyramid. You can see there's basically three levels, and the whole game is to um, make sure that you are optimizing your search program, your content program at each level in order to kind of like rise above the waterline and get your brand and your content assets visible through answer engines and through search. Okay. Three levels you can see here. The first one is basically just doing SEO best practices well. The second is starting to understand what content of yours is actually showing up in answer engines and then adjusting your strategy, your roadmap, and even the format of the content a little bit, maybe even the medium to start to match. And then the third level is really about your digital footprint, right? So beyond your site, how are you being mentioned elsewhere? And we'll get into the details of each of these. Okay. I think my rough estimate, by the way, is that 85, maybe 90% of answer engine optimization is doing great SEO. The best practices have so much overlap. So I think that's a huge relief. And this is why doing SEO well, foundational SEO, is your starting point. So we'd recommend making sure you have good BOFU and MOFU content, right? So content about your product, your category that helps you position there, content about the pain points that your audience is feeling that might lead them to your product. That's a good place to start and make sure you're well covered and saturated. Next, technical SEO. Pages are loading fast, mobile optimized, etc. Three, pruning and refreshing content. If you know what I mean, if you don't know what I mean by pruning, it's really the removal of content that's not actually getting traffic and maybe isn't on a keyword or search that matters to you so much. By removing that, you kind of shift Google's perception of one, the overall quality of the content on your website because you removed the lowest quality stuff. And also it might help shape like, what do you want to be ranking for, right? What are the things that your domain is expert in? Refreshing content. This is another like unsexy thing that actually works really well. Content tends to drop in its search traffic and its ranking after 12 or so months. So looking at what assets are starting to lose that organic search ranking position, lose traffic, and then finding a way to refresh it, make it more relevant for today, make it better, make it more aligned to the search intent. That's a great way to get traffic back. And so once you've done that, along with the other things, along with, well, that's kind of it. Then we can start actually layering in tools to help you understand not only your search visibility, but how you're showing up in AI engines. So some tools, and Austin's going to get into, much more of this, but some tools that we've been playing with are HubSpot has like a search visibility tool, an AI search visibility tool, ZipTie, SEMrush has one too. And so that's kind of like the bridge from going from foundational SEO into this next category of really answer engine optimization. So, in the next level up on the pyramid, we are to be analyzing AI presence with help from those tools and adapting your content, the format and even sometimes the subject matter somewhat, not a huge change, again, 15% maybe change, in order to start ranking better in AI searches. So first, again, using some tool in order to get an understanding of what you are and aren't showing up for. I'd actually recommend using some tool as well as going manual mode. Like get a feel in ChatGPT, in Claude, in Perplexity, maybe in Gemini for definitely in Google and answer engines for like what the citations look like or sort of what the answers actually look like when you're searching relevant keyword terms. Um, I think going manual is important just so you really start to get like a pulse on this thing so that when you go use a tool that gives you that sort of 30,000 foot overview look, you're able to kind of connect back to tactics to actually help you do this thing well. So again, use the manual mode directly into the tool to get a feel for this. Little tip for you. Um, Once you know what you are and aren't showing up for, you're going to want to, or I guess actually, the next step is to see what you are and aren't showing up for, and then also what your competitors are showing up for. And I'd say, it's important to note the format of content that's getting pulled into these results. It's not all blog articles. Oftentimes there are videos, and think about like what is actually the piece that's getting pulled into the citation. Is this a statistic? Is it, what kind of format did that show up as? Step three here is to actually start creating content that is optimized for search, for AI search. Um, One, structuring content that is mirroring headlines there, right? So if there are a bunch of different questions, we want to make sure that those questions are also going to show up in your article or asset, whatever you're producing. Bluff means bottom line up front. So make sure that you are, given the TLDR at the top of a piece. Shorter paragraphs, that's kind of again mirroring what answer engines are putting back, as are FAQs. If you've been paying attention to if you're paying really close attention to SaaS websites and some content, you might notice that FAQs are showing up more on product pages and within assets. And that's because, that format greatly mirrors what answer engines are putting out. Bullet points are great as well. Um, Definitely data and quotes, right? That kind of thing does stand out and therefore seems to get pulled into these answer engines more often than not. I think one of the nice things about answer engines is that it's going to push us towards doing different kinds of content. I think videos are really going to continue to become more and more present in search strategies because they're getting pulled into answer engines, perhaps more than they were into search results. So I'd encourage folks to start thinking about, multimedia content strategy and how, when to use a written piece, a visual piece, those two together, and then also video. So it might be time now to start budgeting and thinking about how that's going to go in the future. And I would say this one's like a little less scientific. It's kind of like this is what we're seeing and feeling and reading, but I don't have the data to back up this last piece. And as a caveat, like or maybe a sidebar, um, we used to talk about SEO as a black box, right? But really over a decade plus, maybe 20 years now, we've we've reverse engineered that black box. Like we know how the algorithms work to a pretty good extent where we're able to be with some level of certainty, confident about the kinds of content that's going to rank well. Right now, AEO is a black box and we can't really see inside. And it's going to take us, I think, years to really reverse engineer effectively what's going to work well in these things. So some of this stuff's like vibes, other stuff is pretty proven. Uh, so I'm going to, kind of give myself an asterisk there. All right. Last piece of the pyramid is about really your digital presence. And it's about kind of proving your reputation for your brand is worth being cited in answer engines. So, things you can do here: engaging in online discussion. There's a lot of buzz around Reddit, right? And how Reddit seems to be so often sourced and cited in answer engines. So thinking about your presence there and in similar forums, whether those be industry specific or broad based, make sure you're participating there and answering questions, not just promoting yourself. And often, if you can bring data, that can help really boost your visibility. Second, this is similar, but it's around review sites like Trustpilot, G2, whatever's relevant for you. We'd encourage folks to keep their profiles up to date, to respond to reviews, and then, of course, make sure that your program to leave reviews is optimized so that you're building presence there. Third is about PR, making sure that, or maybe starting to make an investment in doing pitches to traditional journalists or podcast hosts or people that actually have some, audience that you're after. Um, so there's kind of like the push version of like how can I synthetically like get mentions and get placements elsewhere. There's also kind of this pull motion of publishing content that's really interesting that can get people talking about your brand. So if you're publishing some unique reports or something that's significant, like the Clarify team has these courses that I think are worth talking about and people do talk about in this space, that can help you actually, because people are talking about it, get mentions and help you build your reputation online too. Uh, Third or fourth rather, making sure that you are mentioned in, the top 10 lists across the internet, reaching out to the owners of those lists that are actually getting cited in answer engines. Kind of simple and obvious, but like, got to go out there, hustle, do the work. And that kind of wraps it up for my portion here. So again, the AI visibility pyramid, I want you to be thinking about that as you consider answer engine optimization. Start with foundational SEO, build some visibility into where you're showing up and not showing up in answer engines. Start tweaking your content to fit what an answer engine might prefer, and then layer on this digital presence and sort of boost your strategies to build your whole online presence and persona there. With that, I'll hand things over to Austin.
Hi, thank you. I feel like I learned so much. This was like free education. So thank you for that. Let me just pull up my screen here and make sure I have the right share settings enabled so that I can keep talking to people while sharing my screen. Okay, just gonna make this a little bit smaller. Cool. So Ty just walked us through an amazing history of SEO. And often I feel like what comes out of these kind of deep dives into strategy is tactics. Okay, so what do I do with all this knowledge? How can I actually help myself today? And I think we're in a unique position to talk about it for a couple of different reasons. One is, Ty and I are great partners in trying to figure out the strategy for ourselves. So everything that I'm going to talk about, like we're dog fooding, so there's, a level of realism here. Secondly, we're in a little bit of a new world. I would argue that even though SEO is clearly not dying, it is definitely changing. And so there's this question of what do you do about it? And I just answered a question from somebody who was basically asking, um, uh, you know, do we care about like the formatting, for example, of the content? And I'd say like Google is going to keep producing new rules all the time. It's not clear yet about what's exactly going to happen with SEO and AEO. So I think adopting a growth mindset and experimenting pretty rapidly is probably the only constant that I can really provide out of all this. But having said that, let's jump in a little bit and talk about how we're using a dual strategy to tackle SEO and AEO. So the first thing I would say is, there's not a one size fit all. There's not a silver bullet for tackling SEO in this new modern world where content can be created really carefully as well as being created very rapidly. I say you actually start with a really good strategy and then you pair that with the right tools. I think a lot of people are fixated right now on like the tools without thinking about the strategy. I see every single day online a new agency or a company talking about how they're helping companies get to thousands of page views by creating content rapidly. And what I think is missing from those LinkedIn articles is like, how did they get there? And what are they doing in addition to just rapidly scaling, content? So let me talk then about our strategy, and that might provide a good framework for everybody here to then consider what you might do internally. And I would largely say, though, like think about your own company's size, stage, resources, and appetite for this stuff. Because if you just adopt the mentality of, oh, hey, whatever Clarify is doing, we should go do it ourselves, you're kind of missing the point. If you're a bigger company, I would say you should do a lot more. If you're a smaller company, you may think about how do we carve out a small piece of this and execute it really well. So I can give some advice a little bit later, but don't just rotely apply without thinking through the context. So we pair SEO and AEO content at scale with high quality thought leadership and articles with LinkedIn. And you can kind of think it as like it creates these flywheels. On one side of the house, we have Ty and the Animalz team working with us to create exceptionally written, high quality content that really draws the audience in, tells the story, and is very human in nature. Now, that takes a lot of effort, a lot of time. And for anybody who doesn't understand how businesses work, it also takes money. Animalz is a business. They got to make money too. So you got to pay great people to write great content. At the same time, though, we are playing the game of mass eyeballs. We're trying to get as much surface area as possible so that when people search for a keyword or a term related to Clarify, that we come up in some capacity. And so we're balancing this strategy of, well, we want to be everywhere, but in some places, we don't only want to be everywhere, we want to be the number one thing that people think about when they think about CRM. So this is what this looks like in practice. Our strategy is we start with a topic. We use a tool called Ahrefs to research keywords and phrases that our competitors or our peers are using. There's also a great tool called Profound that will give you kind of a ranking based on a couple terms of all the things that people could be searching for in LLMs related to you. And then we use a tool called Byword to generate articles off that. And for a lot of these are like long tail phrases that may not result in a lot of traffic, maybe one or two views here and there, but at scale, at thousands of articles, you get a lot of surface area coverage. We run a script to basically create that content and to pull it into our CMS, which is called Sanity. And then we recrawl our site. And this loop kind of keeps going in the background. I'll talk in a second about where Animalz comes in, but we're always thinking about, well, what are the long tail terms where we're competing against folks like HubSpot and and Adio and some of our peers even, and we're just trying to kind of land grab to make sure that we're in that conversation. Now, second from that, we think a lot about brand building, and brand building starts with the story that you tell and the message that you share on a deep human level, and that cannot be faked with LLMs, at least not today. And so this is actually like a deep partnership with Animalz where, once a month I sit down with Erica on Ty's team. We have a couple hours of interviews where we go really deep into a topic and we try to extract the maximum amount of value and headspace and thought leadership from it. We write an in-depth article. We turn that into LinkedIn posts and thought leadership. We both boost those posts on LinkedIn. And then we're doing at the same time in the background, which is not kind of highlighted this, is we're looking and comparing how content related from our high quality pieces and our more low quality pieces, how those interact with one another. Because ideally, all the articles that you mass generate are just experiments. And when some of those experiments come up to the top, you then elevate them to the point where you put human behavior behind it and drive a better piece of content. So you can imagine these two things are connected in that we're running a bunch of experiments around content en masse, and then we're perfecting those experiments and optimizing them with Animalz. And again, a lot of it is on the top of the funnel is around getting the ideas out, like, hey, what are the things people are searching for? Once we have a sense of those things, we can then go really deep and drive the content, and probably the way that a lot of people are used to. And in fact, I would say, one of the reasons why this has been hard for a lot of years and why I'm like interested and excited about the opportunity going forward is that the only way you could really overcome this barrier in the past is by having more resources. You just have to hire more people to write more articles. Everybody probably saw on LinkedIn that HubSpot, removed, I don't know, 20, 30,000 articles from their blog inventory because they were poorly performing. So in the past, it was like you had to invest a lot of resources to build those articles, but you run the risk of like them getting removed and kind of losing those resources. Now anybody could potentially be in a position to experiment a lot and figure out what the keywords are that are really valuable to your audience, and then to double down and spend the resources, the time, and the energy to go very deep on writing high quality content, the good old fashioned way with a human and maybe a little bit of help from Claude. Um, and we can't share exact metrics, but like this is kind of the growth that we've seen over the last few months. You can see we were piddling along here during the summertime last year. This is before we had Animalz even, but I was writing a piece of blog content once a week. I was trying to do co-hosting with larger audiences than myself. I was on Kyle Poyer and Lenny Rachitsky, and we even had two different podcasts coming out, and all this stuff just like wasn't really doing much for us. And then you can see back in November, we started this cycle where we started our AOE content growth and we coupled it with Animalz, and the growth kind of speaks for itself. So I really want to focus on why I believe this blended strategy is so important. Because again, I look around and I see a lot of people doing either one or the other. And I think a lot of our success can be ascribed to blending both. Now, again, that might not be for forever. Um, all these things are changing, but at least for right now, I think having a blended approach is what's allowed us to be successful. So first of all, it helps tackle the unpredictability. If you're doing both, you're kind of hedging yourself against getting retaliated on the AEO side from Google, because you're doing the tried and true practice of building great content, optimizing for keywords, and you have human intervention there. So like you're really hedging your bets against the unpredictability of what's happening by doing both. The second is obviously diversification. You have wider coverage. And what Ty actually pointed out before is like you can even more deeply diversify, not only by having the two-pronged approach, but by, within your content repository, going into YouTube ads, going into Reddit posts, going into even something like Quora. Like you don't have to just do blog content. You can think about, hey, we have stuff that's scaled programmatically, and then we have stuff that's not scaled programmatically. And each of these plays a really important role in our strategy. And now let's figure out where we spend time, money, and energy based on the resources and context of the business. And then the last thing too is like, look, these LLMs are obviously getting better, but I would argue on the whole, like they're not as good at creating what I consider really high quality experience-based pieces of content. So E is still relevant here, like experience, expertise, authoritativeness, trust, like these are all the things that play into what Google thinks is great content. And I will tell you that an LLM is not going to produce a piece of quality content that is better than an agency or a great writer on your team could produce with time. And so you have to figure out like how do you want to be known perception wise, and how do you want that to be reflected. So I'm going to go a little bit into tools real quick, just to I think there's always with these types of talks people like actually want to have the tangible. What can I go do? What can I go explore? So I'll talk about what tools we're using. Modern SEO stack should help you do three separate things: strategize, create, and optimize. So strategizing is all around, help you understand what is your content strategy, what are the keywords that you're going after, what are the phrases, what do you want to be known for? Creation or production is, okay, how do we just like go create the thing? And then measuring, iterating is you get the output of that and you feed it back into what you're doing. And so as we've talked about, it's kind of like our strategy is actually, I would say, a partnership with our marketing team and Animalz. maybe with some deep research on Ahrefs. The production is again Animalz and Byword. We have a team with Ty, and then we have some engineers and a tool with Byword. And then optimizing and iterating is, this is actually a lot more traditional. You can do keyword SERPs, you can use Ahrefs. There's other tools you can use to figure out, all right, how are we actually ranking? How is the work product we're doing evolving? And then you can figure out, well, what do we need to change on a weekly or a monthly basis? And just one tip too is I feel like some people are overly hawkish on their ability to look at SEO. And I actually don't look at things on a daily basis. I look at things on a weekly or monthly basis because that's really going to give you a better indication of how things are trending. It takes time to know if these experiments are working. Say you go create 10 articles, whether you do it manually or programmatically, and you submit them with a keyword search. It's going to take time to understand how that performs and how Google is actually ranking it. So, another thing here is like you want to have a cycle or a flywheel to give yourself time to measure results and make a change that's in lockstep with what's happening behind the scenes that you can't control. So here's a little bit about our stack. We have Ahrefs, and we're looking at implementing a tool called Profound. We also have, the Google Search Console, which is just everybody should have that. Ahrefs is a great tool that kind of lets you do keyword research. You can type in your domain, you can type in competitors' domains, you can build lists of keywords. It can be an expensive tool, especially the engineering version that lets you do things programmatically using their API. But even like the starter one is, I think, a couple $100 a month, $100, $200 a month. So everybody should be able to get started with that. Profound is an interesting tool that effectively takes some of your keywords and comes up with hundreds or even thousands of search terms that people could be entering in the LLM. And then it actually will go out and run those queries for you and give you an understanding of where you're performing in those queries. Now, in my mind, some people look at that and say, well, that's like great, intelligence to understand how we're doing. I actually think it's great content creation because what it does is it tells you, hey, here are all the different phrases people could be searching for. You can actually use that to create content. If you stack rank it by like, what are the top 10 phrases that are in LLMs that people find us? Go and optimize those articles. That would be something that I'd become at a time being like, how do we make these types of articles around these queries so that they stack rank really, really high? It's kind of like you either have a shotgun or a sniper here, and you want to actually be using both depending on the situation and depending on what you care about for your company. For production, we obviously use Claude, Byword. Ty, anything you want to add on like what tools do you use internally as a team to create content?
Oof, there's a long list.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Um, Yep. So Profound is a good, like I mentioned, Zip Tie and SEMrush. We're actually trying a few different tools for AI visibility right now. We haven't settled on one, but Profound is one that's fairly known in the space. But there's like a long list of others that help you get that. Sorry, I moved my mic, but that help you get you that answer engine visibility. We are big Ahrefs users too, traditionally for our search-oriented clients. We like Claude in the way that it outputs sort of like B2B SaaS ready voice and tone copy. But actually, the latest GPT 4.0 uh, uh, model is pretty good too. We've been working with AirOps as a platform. It sounds like somewhat similar to Byword to help us
Yeah,
produce
totally.
more
Same thing.
programmatic type SEO. We're still early in figuring that out. We found that no matter what we end up doing in Animalz, we get hired to do like the very high quality type work. So we're gonna have writers very in the loop. So it's like it's not quite programmatic, but it's using AI to help us accelerate the process to produce an SEO or AEO optimized piece a little quicker. We use Looker to do a lot of our dashboarding in terms of measurement. So we're pulling in Google Analytics, Google Search Console, and Ahrefs data in there. And then, I mean, that's kind of the core of the stack. A lot of time in Google Docs still.
Yeah, I mean, Notion, Google Docs, there's still great ways to create content. Yeah, and there's some good questions. I'm gonna save the questions for the end. That way we can just do them all at once. But there's some, keep asking them. These are awesome. Um, And then, measure and optimize. So obviously, once you create the article, then you have to understand how it's performing. We use Posthog on our website to track web page views and product analytics. You could also use Google Analytics. There's tons of providers out there that let you track performance. Um, and we can talk more about that if people have questions. Then just kind of wrapping up here, a couple more on the SEO and AEO vendor size. There's obviously Profound. There's a couple others that are new too. There's Otterly, ZipTie, Cognizo. And I saw some other people talking about like, well, what about SEMrush versus Ahrefs? Honestly, it's just a preference. I was referred by Ahrefs. I think SEMrush is pretty similar. I think you could probably use both. It depends on your price point and familiarity. So yeah, I just, to be completely transparent, I just looked at Ahrefs. I'd used it at Ramp, thought it was fine. So just didn't even think about looking at other tools. Um, and then on SEO vendors for production, for the actual creation, just like Ty mentioned, AirOps is an example of one, Byword, they have Hypotenuse. And I think like some of the differences between these tools are whether you want to kind of do it yourself or have an agency work with you to do it, or whether you're kind of scrappy and want to engineer your way here. Technically speaking, anybody with an engineering team could do this. You wouldn't have to pay for tools. Like if you really wanted to, all it is you're making a prompt and you're hitting the Open API or Claude or Anthropic API. You're creating content with a prompt that you use over and over again. So, an endeavoring growth engineering team could probably build something like Byword or AirOps internally and save themselves quite a bit of money. We're using Byword because, again, we're a startup, got limited resources. We have enough engineering resources to work around Byword, but the thought process of going and building an application where I can drop in, a couple dozen or more keywords or phrases and have it turn that into an outputted document that has text and images and all the other things you need in a blog, it's just work. And so this might be something we prioritize in the future, because I could imagine a world where actually if we were going to engineer our way there, I would sit down with Ty and be like, okay, I want to create a style guide that represents the different people writing at Clarify. So help me create a style guide and help me come up with all the prompts and limitations for how we've created our manual content. And I would almost treat, Animalz as like a creative consultant or partner in tuning the prompts so that we actually make our generated content as close as measurably possible to our actual human generated content. So like the look and feel, the image creation, the tone, and then what you could actually get yourself into is a world where, for example, Erica on Ty's team is not only the driver of really high quality content, but we could work with her to tool her internally to create lots of content based on that. So maybe we have 2 hours a month where we talk about the most high quality pieces, but we also talk about 10 other pieces really quickly. And can we build tooling around her to go create 10 additional articles that, again, are slightly lower quality, but because we've gone really, really deep in optimizing the tone style guide and it has access to all of our content and maybe is even listening to our Slack channel, it knows exactly what to write about. That would be an example of where, again, if you have the time and money and resources, you can really work with an agency partner or your internal team to make this super custom. In our case, it's really a trade-off between speed and efficiency. In our case, what we're doing is like we're moving pretty fast on the AEO generated side, and then we're moving kind of more at a moderate expected pace on the handcrafted content side. Because some of it is like we have a bottleneck in LinkedIn, right? There's only so many times a day you could post on LinkedIn. So we can really only post 1 or 2 articles a week on our blog. So there's a natural limitation there to how much content we could physically produce with our human-based group. And so the natural extension would be in the future be like, okay, well, how do we kind of take what's in their mind share and make it better? And then on text-to-text AI tools, there's a ton of them. These are all the tools that we use across the stack. And I'm sure a lot of people have ideas about how to do this, like whether you're using Notion AI, Google Chat has their built-in plugin. You could use ChatGPT and Perplexity and also Claude. I find like one thing though that is interesting about all this is like people write differently no matter how much you recommend stuff. So some folks will literally just be copying and pasting in Claude. Other people create an app that they just constantly use inside GPT. And so there's lots of ways to kind of achieve the outcome that you want based on the size and stage of your company. Less is more, in my opinion. Like start small and then think about how you scale afterwards. And then the last question before we wrap up is just like, how should these SEO tools interact with the rest of your stack? I am a really big believer that, if you have the resources and time for it, you should think about, SEO as part of your growth stack. And so in our case, like I'll just share a little bit of my vision for the future. We're obviously creating a lot of custom content with animals, and that lives in docs, and then that gets uploaded into our CMS. We also have all of our content being created with Sanity, and we have like kind of a complex workflow that gets that content into Sanity. I really think about owning our own database of all our SEO content and labeling like the content we create with Animalz different from the content we create programmatically, and then starting to teach the system to update all of the SEO, AEO generated content based on the really high quality stuff that we've done. So like, you have you could think of it as like there's different tiers. The first tier is creation, the second tier is optimization. So you have all these tools to create the stuff, but then you have to go build the system to optimize and refine it. So like we're in the build phase, right? Probably until we get to 100 to 200,000 articles, we're just going to keep adding more content. But at some point, there's diminishing term returns. Like you've kind of every possible search term or combination you've kind of covered. So now we got to start looking at the content that's really high quality, that has like the mind share of me and Ty and Erica and Patrick and Chris on our team. And let's start teaching our system internally to go and update that content based on our conversations. And so that's like something I'm thinking about for the future, is not only how you build it, but how do you optimize it? Because it's a lot of work to go build the articles. And then you got to go make it better. And again, that can be both manual or programmatic, depending on your approach and how much time, money, and resources you have. Um, and the last one too is just as a general call out for everybody, is that a lot of these new age AEO tools are not very smart. So like they're great at creating content, but they're not good at managing content. So for example, like Byword doesn't know if you try to create a slug that's the same twice. So you're going to have to engineer your way around that, right? If you go try to create an article at the same title, it doesn't have any of that context, and it's not smart enough to like not name an article a particular way. So that's why I also think like you should be thinking about how do I own this content in a particular case, whether it's like a CMS or a database. Like you want to be able to rigorously go through and update content. Just as a great example is when we first started with Byword, we didn't know that there are holdout words that you can give it. So we were just giving it our sitemap, but on our sitemap was our privacy page. And so Byword was like linking to our privacy page for every time it talked about privacy, which is like kind of funny, but also a big pain in the ass, because you're like, I don't really want them going to our terms of conditions and our privacy policy every time we talked about privacy. So that's the case where it's like, okay, well, we fixed the problem. We have a holdout group now for that word, but we had to crawl through all of our articles, and every time we see that link, we want to update it with something. And that to me is the case here, is like there'll be lots of learnings you have in this journey that could be created by humans, and you want to programmatically loop through and update all of your content to have those learnings. And the only way you're going to do that is if you build a database and kind of manage it with engineering resources. Um, so yeah, I guess we're going to end on this little quote here. Your tech stack should support your team's ability to generate leads, close deals, and report accurate, actual insights. The tools you select must enable those core capabilities in a way that aligns with your current needs and future goals. So don't buy a tool before you have the strategy. That's kind of like the punchline of all this, is you got to have both. So yeah, we got like 10 minutes left. So Ty, if there's anything you want to add, feel free. Otherwise, we can turn it around for Q&A.
No, that was great for me. I mean, yeah, got my wheels turning a little bit on more programmatic type endeavors. It's interesting.
Yeah, we have some great questions in the chat. I'm going to go back to an early one from Simran, who, in combination with Danielle, asked, "How does readability figure into AEO? Does it? If it does, how do we optimize?" And then Danielle asked a clarifying question, like, "What about readability in terms of the complexity of the language, like the grade reading level of the language?"
Hmm. Um, so I'd love to hear about like readability in the old world. I know there's like lots of rules. I'm not super familiar with them. I do know I read through Google's latest announcement, and there were some small changes around readability, like the physical formatting readability. You can't have too much padding. I think it's largely because People are just like spouting all this content that looks really long. So there are some rules there you should follow, and I think that's just engineering work you can do to like make your site physically read better. On on the actual like readability of the content, I'm eager to see what happens because, for example, there are a lot of tools out there, like Scribble, that apparently detect AI content generation, but it's kind of bullshit, to be honest. Like,
Yeah,
it's not very good. So, like, how
right.
are they really going to determine what's AI generated versus not? Like, there are certain phrases that I think LLMs like to use a lot, and so they might be doing it off that. But
So
I
tough.
I don't know, like I don't know how they're actually gonna detect this stuff.
Right, because there's so many models, so it's like, which LLM is it detecting against, and then these things are changing all the time too. So yeah, I don't know about those. We've been flat. I mean, transparently at Animalz, we've had customers say, "Hey, we ran this asset you produced through a AI checker tool, and it says it's like 70% produced with AI." Like, I'm like, listen, these tools kind of suck. Like this thing, it was not produced with AI. Like we did this thing by hand. I mean, I'll check with our team. Um, and I'm like, well, do you like the quality of the piece? And if the answer is yes, then like, well, what are we talking about here? So anyways, I tend to not totally trust the tools. I think for like blatantly obvious like SEO slop, like it might be able to help detect it. There's like some, correlation with it being accurate, but they're not super accurate. Um, yeah, I don't have strong views on readability. Can't add much to that.
Yeah. The other thing I was going to add too, this gets back to something I was mentioning earlier, which is that the reason why I feel strongly about this strategy and having a place to manage the content is because like creating the content is not enough. Updating the content, I feel like is actually the most important thing to be thinking about. These models are getting better literally every day and every year. So it's cool that Google like has these rules, but like are they going to be able to keep up with every next generation of an LLM that can write
Right.
better and better and be human like? No. So in my mind, I think about this as a two-phase approach where it's like get the surface area as fast as you can, and then focus on optimizing that surface area to be better. And again, I gave you guys a bunch of ideas around how I'm incorporating human elements. But if you don't have the time or team or the money to hire an agency and write content, you could even just think about like, do I rerun all of my content with a new LLM model and a new prompt every year and republish all the exact same content? I think if you held all things else out, it would just get better naturally because the LLMs are getting better. So that's again like maybe the argument for kind of managing yourself and again thinking about this strategically is like the more learning you have and the more input from humans you have and the ability to like run over content programmatically, the better off you're going to be. Um, and yeah, because I see so many people out there that like go buy a tool and create like 10,000 articles and they think they're done. And like that's I don't know. Those are the people that are getting spam flagged by Google right now.
Painful too, right? You get one of those manual penalties and like you might have to buy a new domain next week, start over.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and
Absolutely.
that's also a tip too, is I think like go slow to go fast.
Yeah.
All the times where people have gotten burned by the AEO stuff by creating too much content, it's because they've created too quickly. So you have to think realistically, like Google obviously is inundated right now with people uploading content, but they have some flags. Like you go create 50,000 articles in a week, like they're gonna know. So again, that's the reason why I think having a strategic approach that melds human touch with programmer touch is a really great approach because it will intentionally slow you down a bit so that you're more thoughtful.
Awesome. Want to move to Hannah's question. Hannah asks, so if AI answers are resulting in zero-click returns, should you invest in being in those AI answers like you may have like snippets in the past? Basically, what is the benefit to be the AI answer with zero clicks, or should you be prioritizing creating better, deeper content that is more niche versus broad, but capturing people looking for deeper level learning versus quick answers?
Yeah.
Mm.
This is a great question. I kind of want to break it in two. I think the first one is like, okay, if it's zero click, what's the value of being in the result? I'd say one, they're not always zero click, and we do measure traffic through GPT, Perplexity, etc. for our customers. And we've seen a steady increase of that. Like one, I think adoption is increasing, but two, I actually think people are clicking more than they used to. Maybe it's because like the latest models are actually making citations more prevalent or like clickable. But I've seen that increase, so I think they're not always zero click, and that trend might continue to improve. Um, that's one. Two, it's still, even though people aren't clicking, like think about LinkedIn or X or any of these platforms are optimizing towards zero click experiences to keep you on their platforms, right? To keep you engaging, because that's how they monetize. And so even a zero click experience with your brand is valuable to your brand. They might not like the attribution on a marketer's end gets screwed up, but like whatever. They learned about you, and they now see you in this certain way in a small piece of their brain. And then they might Google you a month later, or they might, go directly to, your website.com and you're going to get that traffic eventually. So there's still value in that, even if it's hard to attribute. The second parts of your questions I think that I go back to like principles, like first principles around like, all right, the question is, should you do broad-based content or like go really niche? And I think the answer is probably some amount of both. Um, it's like you want the one-on-one content, right? For someone that's earlier in their journey or maybe in a different seat within the organization that you're targeting. But you also want the 301 content that goes really deep into a high level of expertise. And I think both might show up in search in different ways. Maybe the search is like personalized. So, you know, Google's overviews know to show it to the person that's like more expert. Or perhaps the person that's expert is just searching for something that actually brings your piece up more readily. I also think the more expert content generally if it's lower volume and it's not as like top of the funnel, which expert content tends to be, those aren't getting sucked into overviews as often. Those are actually staying as traditional blue links a little bit more often. Austin, do you have thoughts on this too?
No, I think you answered it really, really well. I again come back to like where is your company at from a size, stage, and complexity perspective? Like going back in time, if I could redo Clarify's strategy, I think we would have probably hired somebody like Ty sooner because when we were just starting, we had no domain recognition, we had no backlinks, we had no audience. Doing scaled SEO at that point in time, I don't think would have worked. Like I don't think it would have been valuable. When you're just starting a company and you're trying to get brand recognition, your name out there, I think arguably the best thing you can do is try to go for home runs. Like create content that generated a ton of buzz and that gets you backlinks from really good high quality partners. So I think like if you're in the earliest stages of building your content engine and your strategy, small kind of big hitters, high quality production is the right move. I think like that changes over time as you get bigger because you obviously have resources to productize your kind of normal content creation process. And you might also have lead gen goals or brand building goals that like you can't get out of humans alone. And there is this question I think in everybody's heads of, like how much resource to invest in human generated content versus computer generated content. I think comp generated content is really going to help you get a lot of breadth, but like you said, it may not actually get you a lot of depth.
Awesome. All right, we have time for one last question. I want to get to one of Toby's in the Q&A. Toby asks if your content is old, but it's still getting some page views internally, not necessarily from ranking on Google. Do you still recommend like going through and pruning that content?
I mean, that's a good question. I feel like a lot of it depends on the quality of the lead you're getting, right? Getting eyeballs, I don't think necessarily matters as long as the outcome of those eyeballs is what you want it to be. On all the cases where I've seen people prune content, it's because the content is not leading to the outcomes that they hope for. It's like we're getting poor leads, we're getting random people, or like, hey, we have this article that's generating 80,000 views, but like nothing's coming of it. And so ultimately you have to think about like what is the purpose of SEO and content? It's to build your brand and to generate some type of outcome for the business. And if you're not doing either of those two things, then yeah, it's kind of a waste of time, right? Now, in the beginning, when you first start this strategy, you may not really know what's going to work or what's not going to work. But after 5, 6, 7 years, you probably have enough content to know what works well and what doesn't. And so you should be a little bit more critical and consider refining and pruning once you get to the stage where you have more to lose by your brand looking bad than you do with the content with the generation coming in. In the beginning, though, at least for a company like us, it's like we actually care a lot about the lead gen volume. We're trying to tell a story, we're trying to learn, we're trying to get people to understand what Clarify does. And so if we get some impressions or some views that maybe are not exactly what we thought they were, that's okay because we're moving really fast. Ask me again 2 or 3 years from now, and I think I'll have a different answer, which is to say, yeah, our brand and our messaging needs to align with the customer is expecting, because hopefully by then our traffic volume is at such a level where we actually care less about the total volume of traffic and the amount of at bats we're getting than the quality of those at bats, you know? So these are just like the I think the trade-offs that you make as you grow as a company. But Ty, you've seen like dozens of companies go through this. What do you think?
I wasn't really listening to the question when Chris read it out. I was responding on Slack, on chat. So I plead the fifth.
That's okay. That's it's actually perfect timing. You know, we started on time, we'll end on time, out of respect for the audience here. Now, this was great. I learned a lot. I hope everybody else did too. For those of you still on the line, we'll send out the recording in the next day or two, along with links to the slide deck, so you can go back and convince your boss that you need to pursue an AEO strategy. If you need any content help, hit up Tide Animals. If you need a new CRM, one that's actually modern and fun to use, hit up us at Clarify. Thanks so much, and see you guys later.
Thanks all.
Thanks, y'all. See you, bye.